We all know the stereotype, the one of the quiet girl in the corner reading. It's shown in movies, TV shows, and even books themselves. But we know how people really are. We know how readers really are. Yes, we can understand the quiet of reading. We enjoy it even. But talk about our favorite book or bring it up in public, and we become loud. I'm no exception to this. My name is Lindsay Forkel, and you're listening to the Loud Girl Who Reads podcast. Hi again, and like I said, my name is Lindsay Forkel. If you don't know who I am, that's not surprising. Most people probably don't. So let's just start off with a little bit about me. I am 18 years old. Last year I published my first book, A Voice of Life, and then this year I published my second book, The You You Know. I am a children's pastor at my church, and I'm also a substitute teacher, which I know that's a lot of stuff, but somehow I make it work, and it's honestly not that hard whenever you sort it out the way I have. In my opinion, I think that books help us. They not only help us to deal with the world around us, but also we get something out of them. We can laugh, we can cry, we can throw a book across the room, and it all makes us feel. It brings up our emotions, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to write books. So then you can feel the same thing that I have. And I definitely will say that I've enjoyed my writing experience. Now, what is this podcast about, and why am I doing it? Well, for one, I am a loud girl. Been told that practically my entire life. And there's nothing wrong with that. I will say it's inconvenient at times. And I know that there's times whenever I should be quiet. And I try. But I just wanted it to be a way for you to be able to relate with me. Just because I'm a reader doesn't mean that I'm going to be quiet all the time. And you don't have to be the stereotypical super duper soft girl who's just quiet in a corner and barely says anything and doesn't move a muscle, because I know I'm not that way, but that doesn't make me less of a reader or less of a woman or girl. And I just think that it's okay to be a little loud and crazy sometimes, especially when you're really passionate about something. And I will say, I'm passionate about books, I'm passionate about what they give us, I'm passionate about writing them. So will this turn into something of I'm talking to you on a regular basis, or will this be just something fun I do once? I don't know. Will I get a better set someday? I don't know. Will it be something where I maybe add people where I talk to them about books? I don't know. All I know is that I can hope that it brings you some joy as it's bringing me joy, and maybe I can make something out of this. So we're going to jump right into, I asked TikTok and Reddit a question, and I'm going to give you some of those answers. So I asked them, what is your earliest memory of falling in love with reading? I know for me, it was personally, I had bunk beds with my sister. My middle sister, she was on the top bunk and I was on the bottom. And for some odd reason, I thought that I was breaking the rules by staying up late and reading. Oh no, right? My parents probably did not care, but I thought that I was breaking the rules, and so of course I wouldn't have a reading light. That's too bright. No, I would open up my Nintendo DS. I think I had it wasn't a 3DS. I don't remember which one I had. I had the big one. I had the big pink one. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'd open it up, I'd turn the brightness all the way up, and I would read my little baby mouse books through that. And I thought that I was so cool. Now, did they know that I was doing that? Probably. Did I still think that it was cool? Yes, I did. And I will say that's probably my earliest memories of falling in love with reading. And though I did kind of get into a slump in middle school and the beginning of high school, I would say that I've always loved reading. So that's for me how I felt with that. Now let's get on to some of other people's answers. So I'm not going to reveal names on this, but if you know your story, then you know your story. Some of these are definitely beyond my time of being on this world. A lot of the names of the books I have recognized and also haven't recognized, but I will be giving my opinion on the question and everything itself. So here's the first answer. Someone responded with, I was 4 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom turning the pages on my favorite book, Cowboy Andy, and I realized that I was actually reading it. I ran down to the kitchen and was so proud and excited to show my mom that I could read all by myself. I haven't gone a day without reading since. And I will say I've probably been the same way. I remember very vividly whenever I could read and how cool it was whenever I was able to memorize words and just looking down. And I think a lot of people have that experience. So definitely can relate. So another person said, literally, I cannot remember not being in love with books and reading. I grew up with my mom and grandmother reading Bible stories and all sorts of books to me all the time. I was reading them myself by the age of 4. I grew up on a farm in rural North Alabama, and we were poor as a joke. Whoa. I'm gonna pretend like I could read that, but Job's Turkey? That's a new one. Like, I was born in Florida. I lived 10 no, I say 10. I lived 10 years in Florida, and then I lived 8 years here in Tennessee. And I've never heard someone say, as poor as Job's Turkey. That's a new one. But she continued by saying, for Christmas, I often got books as they were what I really wanted. I'm sorry, I'm still so thrown off on poor as Job's Turkey. What? I know that the South has some weird... That's just weird. But I will say, I'm happy that she was in love with books from a young age, because I think that's what really needs to be instilled in kids. It makes me so sad whenever I see a kid who has to be forced to read. Like, reading is such a nice thing, and I know that I do a lot of stuff through TikTok, and like yesterday I posted something. Now this isn't going to be yesterday whenever I post this, but yesterday I posted something about how, I get upset whenever someone's like, well, you need to stop reading right now, and they're on their phone. And yes, I understand that phones and books can sometimes be disheartening to other people because they're wanting to interact with you and you seem out of the situation itself. But also, books, you at least get the learning out of it. I think anything you read, you really are learning something. But also on our phones, not that there aren't good applications for it, I think that we spend and depend too much on them. And playing a dumb game on your phone is not worse than reading. That's my personal opinion. So, and I had some people who were like, well, you need to get in touch with your generation. And I'm like, okay, I can still say that I would prefer people read than, want to play on their phones all the time. So it makes me happy to see that some people were raised to read their entire lives. On to the next one. Someone responded, not even with their first memory, but just goosebumps. She said, then Fear Street, when I got a little older, those were some of the Those are some of the first chapter books I remember reading on my own. I just remember knowing I should be going to bed and staying awake with a flashlight to read one more chapter. Those cliffhangers will get you, she said. Which, I had one Goosebumps book, and I felt shame upon myself because I straight up would not read it. I don't know what it was. I had it on my shelf. I bought it at a bookstore whenever I was like 10. I used my money, bought it, and then never read it. And I was like, okay, I bought a book and I'm not reading it. And for some odd reason, I thought that was a bad thing. I don't know. It was weird. Back to another one. So this one says, I was in 7th grade when I finally fell in love with reading / books. That was when books That's when books started making sense, and I could visualize what I read. It was like this brilliant aha moment. Prior to that, I avoided books as much as I could because reading was hard, and I was so slow at it, I couldn't visualize what I read. So, I can understand having a hard time visualizing, and it makes me really sad because, there are people who can't visualize like what they're reading. They can't visualize their thoughts. So I can understand that, but it makes me happy to know that she was able to, it clicked. And also, middle school is a weird age. I don't know. For me, middle school was the only time that I didn't really read. Kind of a toss-up. So there was another one, which it's funny because I've noticed a little bit of forgot the word for it. A little bit of like a repetition between these stories because the people who grew up in rural areas were the ones who always read because they weren't on TV, like they weren't watching TV, they weren't on their phones, probably didn't even get service on their phones but then they ended up reading. And I can get that. I didn't live in the middle of nowhere. I live in a city for practically my entire life, but I can understand not really watching a whole lot of TV and just reading books. So this one says, my family was rural enough to know that we didn't get any TV worth watching after dinner. So we would gather in the living room and my dad would read aloud for an hour or two. He was a pretty good actor and he'd pick books that my whole family liked. From the time I was about 4 years old to 10 years old, we did that most evenings. I missed it when we stopped, but it did successfully teach me to live the way that books tell stories. But I will say, that's pretty cool. You have a cool dad. If your dad is going to read to your entire family every night and act it out, and you know what? If he was a geek, if he was, now this is not derogatory, but if he was someone who was nerdy in high school, I bet that was who he was, because I bet that was his dream. Like, that was like a dream come true for him, I bet, to be able to read to his kids and be able to act it all out. Because a lot of guys these days, they're too obsessed with being masculine enough that they wouldn't do that. And so it makes me happy that probably brought him the most joy out of anything ever. And because otherwise he just wouldn't do it. So here's another one. And this one, I think this is my last one. But I remember I read it and it made me so happy. This person was so... okay, I'll just read it. So it says, my mom is a reader. I have lots of memories of just finding her curled up on the couch or in the lawn chair or on the kitchen counter. And she also said in parentheses, kitchens are comfortable for sitting in random places. And but her mom would be working through one book or another. And I remember being very small and spending bedtimes snuggled into her side while she read. She read me the entire Little House on the Prairie series, one chapter a night. Probably others too, but that's one that stuck with me. Now, I think it's behind me somewhere, but I have Little House on the Prairie books. I remember my mom and me watching the shows and reading the books together, and that's a good memory for me. But that was just, the fact that she was able to find her mom literally anywhere, and also the kitchen counter reading. What kind of kitchen counters do you have? I would not trust my kitchen counters, let alone sit on them for a long enough time to read. But if you enjoy it, I mean, all the power to you. But it's just so sweet to hear stories of how they found love with reading as a kid. Because I think that's really just a pivotal moment of how you become a reader. Because, I mean, I know the people who don't start reading when they're young. Most times they just don't do it as an adult. And, I mean, yes, TV shows you can sit down and watch with your family. And I do think that there's good things to doing that if you find the right show that you're able to enjoy all together. But also think about this. If you're reading a book together as family, as friends, there's also a community sense in that. Sitting together and maybe you're reading the same part, maybe you're reading different books, maybe you're reading different parts of the same book. It can be a different experience being able to stop what you're doing and be like, look at what I just read, and then explain your feelings about it. I think it has a similar concept to it. I think that they do relate a lot, but I think that there's just an out-of-touch thing that especially young people, which is sad for me considering I'm in that age range, they just don't get it. They haven't fell in love with reading and they just don't get it. And you'll see this a lot with everything I do, that I hate the way books are becoming, where, I know I say I hate the way TV and phones but I say this because there's such good books out there. I have a bunch of them behind me. There's such amazing books. In the past, there were works of art, and then now people are turning them into these crazy works of just whatever they feel like, and they don't get the purity behind it. They want it to be something they can already get on TV, something that wasn't written about before. I will not read spice in books. I just won't do it. I've thrown away books because of spice. It's not something that I'm willing to do. I'm not going to compromise on that standpoint. And even just foul language, I just think it's so unnecessary. It ruins the story for me. And I can understand whenever I've seen this even in Christian books where they'll be like, oh, well, she cursed under her breath. That's one thing. Because that helps you to get where they are, maybe in their walk with faith, maybe just in their life. People aren't perfect, and I'm all for imperfect people being in books. But I just wish that there was a purity that were in books before. Even war books. I mean, I'm okay with a little bit of gore. I just think that there's certain things that, need to stay out of books. Kind of off topic, but, it gets into it because this is the earliest memories of reading. And what are our children reading these days? Not my children. All my children are animals. But, what is really being put into books? And it's kind of sad. But I hope that some of these classics, like Little House on the Prairie, can keep being read by kids so then they can, find the joy of reading just like you did. So one last little tip that I want to leave you with for today. So for this, as the end of my first episode of the Loud Girl Who Reads podcast, let me just leave you with, no matter what, it is okay to be a little loud and to love reading.